Okay, welcome back everyone. Can we get started? So I really appreciate you coming back. So for me, doing 2 lectures on the one day with a short lunch break is hard, but I imagine it could be even harder for you. So thanks for that. I want to finish this afternoon by doing the last ingredients, by discussing the last ingredients you need for assignment 2, and briefly look at assignment 2 itself. So remember, before the lunch break, we discussed this event programming style, right? Where you don't call your own code, but you define to which events your code should answer, should react, right? And then you explain that in this case to the browser, and then when you're done, the browser will go into loop waiting for these events to happen, and every time an event happens, the browser will call your code for you. We'll come back to that later. So you can generate your own events, but what typically happens is that you react to events that are generated by the browser. And the Design has these most of the important events in section 8.3. So that's not on the section on JavaScript or on JavaScript in the browser. Why I personally expected it, but it's in the jQuery section. So that's why I mentioned it. It's not maybe not the most obvious place to look for. So one set of these what events that you can expect are defined by the DOM recommendation itself. Right? So this is a part that is standardized by W3C, and it's in the DOM because these are the events that W3C expected would be valid for a wide range of web circumstances. So not only if you are in HTML, but for instance also when you are dealing with SVG documents or other type of documents. These could be relevant. So things that you see there are either mouse related, right? So there are a lot of events related to mouse behavior. So click, double click, mouse down, mouse up, mouse over, mouse move, mouse out. They all relate to the mouse. And what is a good exercise for yourself is to see, okay, how do things like this happen on a mobile, for example, right? So things like click probably still work, right? But mouse out or mouse over probably not, right? So think about this. You have similar things for key presses, right? So every time the user hits a key on his or her keyboard, these events will trigger. So there will be one event for the entire key press, but there will be a separate event for the key down and the key up. Right? So you can make the events very, very detailed and precise if you want to. So this is a bit similar to the CSS, right? If you see it for the first time, you think, okay, this is really, really detailed to the very, very last pixel. Why do I need it? Well, sometimes also in this interaction programming, these interaction styles, these things can really matter. So you can make it as precise as you want to. But also events for resize and scroll. Right? So think about assignment 1 when you resize the browser window. Right? The browser will reflow your content and redisplay your page. If you want some code to run when this happens, right? You can write that code and subscribe it to this resize event, right? And then your code will be called every time the browser resizes a window. And the same for the scroll event. So every time the user scrolls, either by on a touch by swiping, or by using the scroll bar, or by other means, this scroll event will be called. And you can do something with it if you want to. Now there are also specific events specified by the HTML recommendation, and it depends a bit on what version you use, which events are there. We already saw this load event, right, which is really important because it's generated by the browser when it's done loading your HTML document. And this means that it's the browser way of saying, okay, I've now built this entire DOM tree, right, and you can do whatever you want with this DOM tree. If you do it before this load event is triggered, then it's still building the tree, and unexpected things can happen. So, and I'm sure, right, many of you will make this mistake. You will write a piece of code that is fine by itself, but because you call it before this load event happened, it doesn't work as you want it to do. And you can stare as long as you want to your code, but because there's nothing wrong with that piece of code, you will not find it. The problem is in how you call it and when you call it. So we will come back to that. There are maybe less obvious events. So focus, right? What is the focus event? When is it triggered by the browser? The focus event is when you have a form, right, and you click inside the form element, and the cursor appears to notify you that at that moment that element is now in focus of your keyboard and will receive a keyboard defense. So the moment that the text element that you want to type in gets the focus, the focus event is clicked, and you can do something. For example, you can make the text field a different color to notify the user that it is now ready to type in the text field. And of course, when you leave the focus, because you click on something else, you should change the color back, and then the blur event is called, and you can make that happen. Submit and reset are, of course, events related to the form itself, right, to the submit button. So there are two things I want to say about this in relation to the assignment. So one part of the assignment is that, remember in assignment 1, when you press the submit button, you receive this ugly page from us, right? That you should now fix. So make your homepage behave like this one-page site that I discussed in the morning, right? So every time you click on something, you don't leave the page, but you stay on the page. So if you click on the submit button, the page should just stay, and you should not go to this ugly page of us. So you need to do something special to override the submit behavior of the browser. Right? So this is of course your entry point to that. Every time the user submits, clicks the submit button, this submit event will be called. You can write a piece of JavaScript that does what you need to be done instead of what the browser does by default. And the other thing I want to say is that the reset event is clicked when the reset button for your browser form is pressed, if you have a reset button, and that resets the whole form in the browser to 0. Right, so it cleans out all the things filled in. That's the reset button of your browser. What I want you to do for the assignment is make your own reset button that actually resets the content of the database on the server. Right, so if you have added 100 phones for testing purposes and you want to reset the entire database to its starting position, right, I want you to call a reset function on the database and make that the reset button. So there's a different reset button in the browser and then in the assignment. So make sure you don't confuse the two. And then there are all kinds of select and change events. I will leave that for you to find out. And so these are all events that have been there for ages. There are also some relatively new events introduced by HTML5. For example, there are events related to printing. Right? So there are, every time you print something before your document is sent to the printer, there's a piece of JavaScript called, and when it's done, that's also, so you can also use things like that. And there are more. And most of these events have corresponding attributes in HTML5. Right? So if you want to bind the function to the load event, you can say body on load, and that works for all these things. Right? So it works for on click, it works for on blur, on focus, on abort, on error, etc. So you can do that in HTML for all these events. What I want you to do, because of this separation of concerns, right, is do something else, and do all the event registration in the JavaScript itself, so you don't have all these JavaScript function calls in your HTML code. In the HTML, you keep it clean, right? You try to do all the CSS in a CSS style sheet. I want you to do all the JavaScript of assignment 2 in a separate JavaScript file, and don't use this these attributes in HTML. So that's the request and the challenge for the assignment 2. Now, I told you in the previous lecture that you can copy-paste examples from the web as long as you understand them, right? So a good way to see if you can actually understand everything that's going on these examples is to find out of each piece of code when is it supposed to be called, right? On which event is it supposed to work, or is it already part of the example that it binds the piece of code, the function, to an event? Because if you understand that, it makes understanding the overall picture a lot easier. And vice versa, right? For your own assignment code, for every function that you write, think before you start writing it. Okay, when should this function be called? On which event? The answer is always an event, right? It's always this function is called after the load event happens. This function is called after the click event on this button happens. But the answer is always there's an event, and knowing which event in which context is called really helps you when you develop something. Like I said, right, we have this this style where you have to write functions that respond to events. The functions are called handler functions, telling the browser that your handler function should react to an event is called subscribing. Some tutorials call it binding the handler to the event, registering the function with the event. These are all terms that mean the same thing, right? And there are different, very different syntax notations to do the same thing. What you need to know is every function that reacts to the event, there needs to be a way to tell the browser what the link is between the two, right? Because the browser will call your function, and if you can recognize the different syntax variations, that helps. So these attributes are one way to do it. You can also do it entirely in the JavaScript. Right? So this is an extremely simple example where when the event happens, the body style background color turns to silver. Right? So this is a line of code that combines the DOM with this CSS property background color and changes in the JavaScript. What this example is not about how you change the color, but it's about when do you call this function f, right? So you could say in the HTML on click call function f. I don't want you to do that. I want you to do the registration or the subscription in the JavaScript, and this is one way to do this in pure JavaScript without using any queries or any libraries. And we will see later that this is one way to do it. It's even a lot easier when you use jQuery. So this is a subscription. Yeah.
I have a question about the second assignment. It
Yeah.
says that we should be able to sort all the columns. How do we sort pictures?
I come back to the details of the assignment. I first want to do the basic ingredients, and then I will come back to the assignments later. So there's one more technical detail this is something that I want you to be aware of. You won't be needed, I think, in the assignment if you do the event registration cleverly, but it's good to that you are aware of it. So suppose that you have a handler that is bound to a click on the P element, right? And there's a different handler bound to a click on the U element, and a different unordered list. So the L is the rescaled thread. So there is an unordered list. So the list element, there's a third handler on the list item, and finally there's a handler on the anchor in the list item, right? Then if you click on the anchor, in principle all the four handlers could be called, right? It's a bit like the conflicts in CSS. You have rules for all these things. One is more specific than the other. What will happen? And the answer is, for different applications, you could imagine situations that different answers are the right answer. Right? So one possible answer is that you go from top to down. You first call P, then you call U, then you call I, and then you call A. Right? You can also do the other way around. You start from the bottom and go to the top. You can also do an override model where only A gets called and it overrides. And what you want to do depends a bit on the situation, on the context. Now, what I'd like you to know for the exam is that you can do all the three or even more options, right? But technically how you need to do it, I don't require you to know. So that's one thing. And this notion is called event bubbling. So if you see that in the side book or in other online material, it refers to this problem, that in theory you can have multiple handlers on the same event, depending on this hierarchy. And the other thing is that there's also all these handlers that are defined by the browser itself, right? So like in CSS you have default styles that the browser provides if you don't provide style. Well, there are also handlers that the browser provides you if you don't provide it. So in assignment 1, there is a handler defined by the browser that deals with the submit button. And if you press the submit button, what happened is defined by the browser's handler function. Now, in some cases, you want to override it and say to the browser, well, just only do my thing, right? And don't do what you normally do before or after it. And that's also possible. So that's it's called preventing the default option, right? And there will be examples also in the side book how you do this. Right? And of course, this is what you also need in the assignment to make sure that after all your nice code was called to handle the submit button, that the browser still does what it normally does, namely go to these click page handlers. Right? So you can also there play with these events and see to a very great detail what happens and what should not happen. Short recap, right? We have seen that this JavaScript is a general programming language, not unlike C++ and Python. We can use the DOM to manipulate everything in our HTML tree and everything in the CSS. We can use events and handlers to exactly define when the timing of all this stuff needs to happen. So there's only one key ingredient missing, and that is how do these partial page updates communicate with the server to get new data from the server without actually going to this web page on that server, right? So the whole notion of AJAX as a technology to implement these partial updates, that you don't need to go from one page to another page with a total page refresh in between, but you just click on something and then a tiny thing updates. So in my table with the stock market example, that every time something updates, it's a very tiny cell in the table that updates. It's not the whole page that gets refreshed. So how do you do that? Well, answer is that's the part where AJAX comes in, and the cookbook recipe for all these AJAX examples is basically the same every time, right? So you first make your initial page, and that you do using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in one way, one combination of another. Part of that is to set up all your handler functions, right? So all the JavaScript code that has functions, that's nice, but you need to subscribe them to events to tell the browser when to call them. You use the DOM to do whatever you want in response of these events, how it should change your HTML or CSS. And then when called, right, the handlers do the magic. So this is this for loop that you don't need to write, but your browser will do it for you. And then in these handlers, there needs to be communication with the server over HTTP. So there is the way you communicate with the server in your JavaScript is again by using the HTTP standard, right? And the AJAX name derives from the fact that it's asynchronous. That's the first one, right? That's in JavaScript. That's the second one. And the X for AJAX stands for XML. I think I missed one A, but okay. Sorry, get back to that. So the asynchronous part, I think, is really important, right? Because it has to do with these events. So the request that you do in your AJAX function is typically a request that you do in response to an event, right? But the AJAX call itself, you also implement by making an event. Because what you will do is you will submit a request to the browser for some information, and you're not going to wait for it. You're going to continue with the rest of your code, right? And if the server answers, then some event is triggered that the answer is there, and then some of your code will be called to deal with the new information, and then that second handler will do the work, right? So in every AJAX call in practice, there are multiple handlers. There's one handler that is called initially to make sure that the AJAX call happens at the right time, and then there's a second handler that deals with the reply of the answer. So the asynchronous part in the name AJAX is really important. And in the beginning of AJAX, the data that was transferred from the server to the browser was always XML data. And that's what the X stands for. And nowadays that's a bit unfortunate, because I don't know any modern application anymore that uses XML for this purpose. Everybody uses JSON, and that's the object notation that comes with JavaScript. It's much easier, it's much more efficient. I cannot think of a very good reason to ever use XML over JSON in practice. So also in this assignment, we will not be dealing with XML whatsoever. We will be doing strictly JSON. We'll come back to that. But that's where the name AJAX came from. Right, so you will do this asynchronous request. Asynchronous means that you don't wait for the reply, but you just continue with your code. And then when the reply comes in, an handler is called that will do the update or whatever of your page using the DOM standard. Right, so the cookbook is always the same. You set up your entire page, you set up the handlers, you do the request at the time that it needs to be done, typically on responsive click or some other event, and then you set up a second handler function to deal with the response of the server at the time that the response comes in. Now that has one advantage, of course, is that your browser doesn't freeze while you're waiting for the reply. Right? Everything behaves interactively because you don't need to wait for the reply of the server. You can just continue. The downside, of course, is that if the request doesn't get an answer quickly, that the user has no clue that there's an AJAX event happened at all, that this request has been sent. It's all under the hood, right? Just probably the user clicked on a button and nothing happened. Right? And there's no feedback. So if you want to give feedback on an event that takes too long because you're waiting for a server to answer, you need to do something special by showing a loader or or an hourglass figure, for example, or a progress bar, but you need to program that in yourself, and most people don't, right? So the typical response in this AJAX environment is that if the server is slow or there's a problem with the network, that it's not very clear for the user what happens. Now the question is, of course, is how to get this communication going with the server. And there is an object introduced in the 90s by Netscape. It was not never standardized, but it got very, very popular very quickly. And the situation is that now we're stuck with it. Right, so all the browsers implement this XML HTTP request object. All the AJAX calls use this object because it's basically the only thing that has been standardized in practice, right? Not by writing a nice standard, but just by all the browsers implementing it. If you see the example code in the Zybook and you think, wow, this is really ugly, then I agree with you, right? It is really ugly. The good news is that you will never use it in practice directly in this ugly way, because all the frameworks like jQuery have a nice, properly designed interface built on top of it, right? And you will use the nice interface, and their code will use the ugly XML HTTP request object. But it's good to know that the whole thing works because this object is present in all browsers of all brands, of all vendors. So if you look how this looks, it's still the same recipe, right? So it's setting up the handler function and bind it to the event. So if you see in the first line, we make a variable using this object that is provided by all the browsers. And then we have the event that is created when the reply will come in later. That event will be on the ready state change. If you think that is a very smart name, that's very good. I don't agree with you. And then there can be various state changes in this object, and all these state changes have numbers. And if the state changes to state 4, then we are there. Then we're in the state that we want to be, right? So then we want to get some result text from the server, and that result text is in the xhr.response text property. So we can do whatever with the response that we want to, right? So if we have done this, then we have set up our function, our handler, and bound it to this event. Right, so then basically we are done. We only need to do the request itself, and in this case we send the GET request to this server, right? And then we send it, and after we send it, we are done, right? So the code will just immediately go on right here. We will not wait for the reply of the server. That is what makes it asynchronous. We will immediately go on, and when this server replies. This object will change the state internally, and our function will be called. And then if we are lucky, it's state 4, and something happens. Right? So this is how it all works internally under the hood. This is the low-level stuff that the jQuery will do for you, and the assignment to the request is, okay, do this type of things, right, but use the proper jQuery methods to do so. So AJAX became really popular by this feature of Google that it will autocomplete your results, right? Google called it Google Suggest. But later Google Maps also used it heavily, and very soon after Google started to use it, many other popular websites also use it. The big advantage is that it allows this smooth transition to get new information in from the server without doing this total page refresh, right? It also makes it faster, right, on your browser, because you only need to get the information that you really need, and you can leave the rest on the page. It also makes your network traffic more efficient, right? Because if you for every interaction need to reload the entire page, well, in reality only a small fraction of this page changes. That's also really inefficient in terms of network. So especially in the early mobile context, right, where people have very limited bandwidth on the mobile, it makes also AJAX really popular. What it also made it really popular is that you don't need anything new, right? The moment that the browsers implemented this XML HTTP request object, you have everything you need for AJAX already, because the rest is just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, DOM, etc. So it became so popular that a lot of these companies that used to make desktop applications, like where you really need to download an application and install it on your own computer, and move to the cloud and move to making the same functionality available on a website. With the big advantage, of course, is that then your users don't need to install anything, right? And also you can do quickly run updates, because you just only need to update your own server. And as long as the browser, your users use a more or less up-to-date browser, you're fine. So this really made AJAX I think a crucial element in today's web. There are a lot of implementations of the basic AJAX ID. Now, there are all kinds of implementations that basically change every letter that AJAX stands for. So one is that sometimes this asynchronous feature is not what people want, right? And they really want a synchronous way of communicating, so really sending a request and then waiting for the server to send a reply and then continue. So there are different libraries that also support a synchronous variant of AJAX. The JA, of course, stands for JavaScript, and there are other languages that use AJAX as well. There is this standard. This is not for the exam, but for your information. There is this standard called WebAssembly, which basically defines kind of an assembly language for web browsers. And every language that you can compile to this WebAssembly basically becomes a potential replacement for JavaScript. So if you have a C++ to WebAssembly compiler, you can actually write scripts in C++ by compiling it to WebAssembly, which also makes it necessary that AJAX becomes available in other languages. And like I said, there are many other formats than XML, and JSON is the main one being used, just because it's so easy to use in JavaScript, and we will see why. So, with all these advantages, of course, there are also disadvantages. So one a nice feature of this single page interaction styles, right, is that you have this continuous feel and that you don't have big changes in your user interface. Of course, the downside is that if you're interacting with a website for a long time and then make a mistake and you think, okay, I click on the back button for undo, and it then goes back to your Google search page, for example, that you used to find the page an hour ago, that behavior is really unexpected. And there are different ways to intervene this. Right? So if you press on the back button, there's also an event called. Right? So you can catch the back button and make the browser do something else. Of course, that can also be really annoying if you really want to go back. So how to do this efficiently and effectively in a good way is actually quite hard in AJAX. There's all kinds of information that gets requested by AJAX calls that will never be found by search engines, because they will never discover the URI that you use in your JavaScript to request this information, right? So it will not be indexed, it will not be found. So So that makes it sometimes problematic. There's a little bit of accessibility issues, right? So of course, if you don't have JavaScript, then you have a problem in the first place. And some, for example, some screen readers turn off JavaScript because for them it's typically not useful. But there are also these usability issues around response time. Right? So if your server is slow and it takes like 5 seconds for the information to come in, it may be so slow that the user doesn't even remember what the event was that triggered the request in the first place, and you just unexpected see a change on your page. We go to web analytics later in the evaluation class. I want to come back shortly on this security issue that I mentioned before the lunch break. In general, when you run JavaScript from a different website, right, on your browser, because you just downloaded an HTML page from that website, there's already a security issue. But if that piece of JavaScript suddenly starts to contact all kinds of other services without you knowing it, right, there's even a bigger security issue. So with AJAX, the security issues around JavaScript became even more important to solve. And one solution is called the same origin policy. And I think that's good for also for dealing with assignment 2 to think about. So in general, if I make a website, right, I'm the developer of website A, and I have all kinds of HTML pages that have JavaScript downloaded also from my website A, right? The JavaScript makes AJAX calls to have these page updates, and the AJAX calls do HTTP requests also to website A. That's all fine. But then if website B also makes HTML pages with JavaScript, and then does the request sent to my website to A, right? So B sends to A, then that's not what we want, right? So I want to provide services to my customers and not to the customers of website B. More harmful is that website B might be a malicious website that knows that his or her users already visited my website, right, and use these requests to get information from the users that they left on website A, for example, using cookies. So in general, this is not what we want, right? So users might first go to A, then go to B, and B might abuse that to use to get information from my users on site A. So we want to block this, right? But how can you block this? Because if you think of it, where does if I am the receiver of the AJAX request, right, and I want to check if this is from a user of site A or a user of site B. If you were first my user and now you go to site B, the request will come from the same browser. Right, so there is no way to see if this is a legitimate request for my own scripts, for my own website, or it is a malicious script from it's a JavaScript from my own website, or it's a malicious script from another website that is making the calls. Because in both cases, the actual call will be made by the browser of my user, and it will come from the same browser, the same IP address, everything will be the same. So here we have a problem, and this cannot be solved, right? Unless the browser collaborates in this scheme. Sorry. So only the browser knows when it sends the request whether the JavaScript that is making the request came from A or from B. Right? So the only way to solve it for A is if the browser tells A, this is a request that came from a website, from an HTML page with a JavaScript from your site, or it comes from a different site. So the browser needs to collaborate, and site A needs to trust the browser doing the correct thing. So basically what all the modern browsers will do is either give a warning or completely block such requests. Right? So if site B tries to contact, send an HTTP request using AJAX to my website, the browser will say no. I will not allow this, I will block this. Unless A explicitly tells the browser that this is okay. So of course if your business is that you run a web server where you do stock market updates for the newspapers, right? And you want this, right? And then you say, yes, it's okay. These domains are allowed to call me, and it doesn't need to come from my own domain. Right, so you need to be aware of this. That in general, this is an option. So for the assignment, there's a special case because you will be running your browser on your laptop, and you will also be running your server on your laptop. Right? So this is a special case that your browser will recognize because you will use localhost with some port number as the domain. So then your browser will assume that the things are okay. Right, so if everything goes right on most browsers, on most platforms, this will not be an issue for assignment 2. But if you do get warnings about these same origin policy violations, right, it has to do with this, and then something went wrong in the setup. So either your browser doesn't recognize that your HTML came from your own laptop, or it doesn't recognize that your HTTP requests are sent to your own laptop, one way or another. But if you do both correctly, then this should not be a problem. So I already mentioned this JSON example. What I really want you to see is how a JSON, a piece of JSON data looks like, and what I hope is that you recognize this as just a simple list, right? So because it's in square brackets, open, close, and that the things that are in the list are separated by commas, like normal JavaScript lists, and that in this case, what is in the list are objects, which are these property value pairs, right? So that this is basically just the object notation that you would use if you would assign a variable in your JavaScript code. And it's the same for a JSON piece of data. It's not completely the same. There are some really detailed examples of exceptions that I don't need you to know. But in general, it is good to realize that you can send this as your HTTP body from the server to the client, but also from the client to the server, and that all the libraries have very nice ways to have a string that arrives like this, make into a real list with objects that do what you expect it to do. Right? So because these are strings that are sent in text over the HTTP protocol, so what you want, of course, in your browser is to have a list that behaves like the JavaScript list with objects. And also, if you are on the server side, in the next assignment, you want the same on the server side. So to convert the JavaScript objects that correspond to this to text, to send it, and then we get back to JavaScript objects on the other side. Right? That's supported by all frameworks, so you don't need to do it yourself, like you need to do it in XML, and they also do it very efficiently. So you can use these examples for large amounts of data. Right? So the stock ticker example, right, there was no problem in the overhead of parsing these type of strings and sending these type of strings, because all the JavaScript engines in the browsers have been optimized to do this very efficiently. So this is the type of data formats that I want you to use in assignment 2. I propose we just do the assignment, right, and then skip the break, but also skip the second half of the lecture. Is that okay? So now come back to your question. So like I said, right, for assignment 2, you will be reusing your assignment 1 HTML and CSS. We will not grade it on HTML and CSS, only on JavaScript. So everything you wanted to do and couldn't do yet, feel free to do now. There are 4 tasks, and you need to do all 4 of them. And my recommendation is then do them in this order, right? Because task 1 is really simpler than task 2, and the things you learn by doing task 1 will help you with doing with task 2, etc. So please do them in order. So the first task is that your tables should become sortable, and it says sortable on all columns, and of course that means sortable on all columns where it makes sense, right? So feel free to interpret it liberally. So if you have a column with the stream sizes, right, and you have numbers there, think a bit about how you would sort numbers, if you would sort them alphabetically or not, right? Typically not. If you do everything perfectly, then you get the full points. If you, by accident, sort numbers alphabetically, okay, there will be a very minor penalty, but it will not make you lose all the points. So don't make too much of a fuss about this. Show that you can sort all the columns of your table. Now, there are many sortable tables on the web, right? And all the developers of all the websites, they have not invented the wheel. They all use the same code over and over again. So the goal of the first task is just to get you started with JavaScript, right? Just look on the web if you can find a nice piece of JavaScript that sorts tables for you. There are many good examples that do so. You include the location of the JavaScript library that you found. You typically add one line somewhere on your HTML or in your JavaScript file that calls that code on your table, and you're done. Right? So if you think, oh, I have done assignment 1, all my tables are now sortable, and I only added 2 lines of code in my assignment 1, do I do the right thing? Yes, then you do the right thing. Right? This is just to get you started. Assignment 2 will already be a little more complicated, because you will now use the web form that you used before, right? The way you submitted the content of your form with a post to our website. You will have tested that many times, right? So if you now use your database for assignment 2, there will be lots of examples and phones with probably XXX on every field because you were testing it, right, in your table. To reset that, right, I want you to make a reset button so you can practice with these click events, right, and send a request to reset the database to our web service. Right, and you do that very simple by making an AJAX request to your own website, right? So sorry, to my website, but with your own key. So replace the question marks with your key again, and then add /reset. And if you send that to the browser, it will reset your database. Right, so it will be the server-side implementation of this reset functionality. So it will help you to clean up the database, to make sure it's not a mess, and you get all the testing data back in the next task. But it will also help you to make a button and to practice with a very simple AJAX request, right, and get you started. For the more complicated part of task 3. So in this task, what you should do is you take your table with your phones, you delete all the rows that you added there manually in assignment 1, and you use AJAX to get all the information about your phones in the database. And when you get the response back, right, you will get a JSON text string back with all the contents of the database. You will use that to put that information in the table using the DOM, as I showed you before the break, right? And I hope you now recognize, oh, this actually looks like the stock market example. It's a table. We get information from a server that is from a database, and we use the DOM to manipulate our table and to add the information from the database into the table. Right? And then basically your whole functionality in terms of corresponding to our web service is done. The only thing that remains is this form submission. Right? So of course now that all this information is there, you don't want your users to leave your page when they submit a new phone. What you want is that the page stays there, the data is submitted to the database, it's added to the database, but it's also added to your form, and everything else stays the same. So you need to use AJAX to do so. And of course here also the data that you send in this JSON format. Right, so all the communication with the web service is in JSON. So you send information in JSON to our web service when you post data, and you want to get it back to fill your table, you get JSON back from us. So all the communication is in JSON. So all the AJAX requests, right? There will be no HTML involved in the data that is sent over the HTTP. It will only be JSON. Is that clear? The only HTML involved in this assignment is the HTML that you write yourself, or have already written yourself in assignment 1. There's no new HTML that you need to write for this assignment. The only thing that you need to write is this JavaScript code. Okay. Again, right, we have a rubric that details how the TAs were graded. So I would use this to make sure that the TAs grade you all in the same way. Again, I encourage you that you also use it, right, to see where you spend most time. And if you can get the tables sorted at all, right, you can quickly see, okay, it only gives you 2 out of the 10 points, right, or 20 out of 100 points. So if you don't get the tables working at all, but the rest you do fine, you still have an 8, right? So I think it's actually quite easy, but don't get stuck on this because it's not worth your time to spend too much time on this. Also for the dynamic table, there will be lots of points, but also there, right, there is the part where you get the information from our servers and put it in the table, and there is the part where you deal with the submission of your form. Don't make problems with one, get you in a position that you can not even get started to the second one, because both are quite a lot of points, and if you're stuck with one, please continue with the other. Okay, I will give you a few tips from the Zybook. So if you look at the Zybook, there's this getting started section that's actually quite important. So one thing is, how do you get access to all this nice jQuery that I will ask you to do, all the jQuery functionality. You need to import in your HTML page the JavaScript file that defines the jQuery core functionality. Right? And it looks like this. It's like jQuery with a version number and an MIN for abbreviated for minimized. So to make sure that you need to download as less content as possible, they have minimized it, removed all the spaces and stuff, and then .js for JavaScript. Now, if you use this example here, right, this means that it will only work if you have the JavaScript, the jQuery JavaScript file in your own directory, in the same directory where your HTML page is, right? Which means that you need to copy the JavaScript file, also need to submit it because otherwise it will not work for TAs. So we will ending up with hundreds of copies of JavaScript that will not get updated, etc., etc. So this is actually not what I like you to use. What I like you to use is to get it from the web, right? It's the web, by using a URL and get it from the jQuery server. Now, there's the downside from that is that if you are the jQuery organization, right, that is largely not-for-profit, that will increase traffic for them a lot, right? And if everybody in the world uses their service to get the initial jQuery page, that's not very nice for them, right? So the Zybook actually has a very nice middle ground, which is using these content delivery networks, right? So jQuery hired a company to do this, and they have set up a network like this, right? So this is the situation where you have one server from jQuery, and every student, but also every commercial company in the world uses their one server, and if this server is down, nothing works, and if this server does work, they have a lot of network costs. What they do is they have a content delivery network set up that deals with replicating these types of content that are used a lot, right? And jQuery is one of these examples that it gets used a lot. So what happens if you use the example in the Zybook, you will get your jQuery, the most recent version, up to date, whatever, checked by this content delivery network from a server near you. So it will be fast, it will be quick. Nobody will be annoyed that you overuse one server. And also when one of these services is hacked and goes down, for example by a denial of service attack, the other services will automatically take over. Your application will still work, right? So everybody is happy. So the only downside, of course, is there are costs for this content delivery network for jQuery, but not for you. So my urgent request is use the example in the Zybook in section 8.1 for getting the initial jQuery library. Now, what it also shows is that every functionality in jQuery is accessed using this jQuery function, right? But the dollar sign is the abbreviation for this query. So in real jQuery code, you will see this dollar sign everywhere. Right? So every example that you look up on the web on jQuery will have this dollar sign. And if you think, what is that? That doesn't look like JavaScript. No, it's just JavaScript. It's just another name for this jQuery function. And by the way, JavaScript allows the dollar sign as a name for a variable. So jQuery more or less claimed this, right? And everybody, if you see a dollar sign, everybody assumes it will be jQuery. Okay. What I want you to what will happen if your browser complains about this dollar sign, right? Don't think, okay, this is the browser not liking the dollar sign. This is some error in your initial part here that you forgot to include the jQuery library before you used the first dollar sign. So if you first use the dollar sign and then include it, it will not work. You need to do it the other way around. So the error messages will just look a bit strange because of all these dollar signs, right? But this is what's going on. Okay, then very briefly the advantages of jQuery, right? So before the break, I said, okay, jQuery is yet another thing you need to learn, but it's worth it. So one thing you constantly need to do every time you need to change something in your node is to find these elements in the tree, right? And this whole tree structure context that I showed you works, right? It's very general. but it's also a lot of work. And what jQuery provides is a syntax using selectors that is almost 100% identical to CSS. So everything you learned how to get your rules applied to the right nodes in the tree, right? You can reuse that knowledge in jQuery, because if you know how to define a rule for a node, then you also know how to access it in the DOM tree using jQuery, because the selectors are completely identical, right? So p.hello selects all the classes with a p element and a hello class attribute. Right? So it's just exactly the same as in CSS, and it's very nice. And another thing that's very nice is that every time you want to do something on an object, and you get back from your selector one object, you can apply a function to that object and does what you want. In this case, you probably get a lot of objects back, right? And you can apply the same function to the result, and it will apply the result to the whole list of objects. So there are all kinds of convenient things that makes your life easy here. So the selectors, only the selectors for me are worthwhile doing this. The event section also, I think, right, so this is the event binding code that I showed you in one of my slides, right? So this is the official way to do it with JavaScript. No jQuery. The official jQuery way is this, and the shorthand is this. Right? So this selects a button and binds the handler function that we just defined using the on-click event. Right? So this is really a lot shorter, a lot less to write, but also this is a lot harder to make mistakes in. Right? So because this stuff over here, there's just too much room for error here if you could make it more complicated. So that's also a reason to use jQuery. One final thing, you can do a lot of things with the style, and there are various plugins for jQuery that you can use to make more adventurous things, right? So there will be the famous cat picture example, right, where you can make the picture fade in and fade out, make it slide up and slide down, right? So you can make it very fancy if you want to by using these predefined plugins. You don't need to write the slide in and slide out, or fade in, fade out functions yourself. I think this is the last, yeah, and this is the last, really the last thing that I want you to show. By combining these style attributes and the other niceties that jQuery provides you, this DOM manipulation that you need to do for assignment 2 really becomes simpler and less work. So there are all kinds of examples that you can use for assignment 2, and how you use jQuery to quickly manipulate your table and other elements. And I think, right, code like this to remove a list item is really a lot simpler than the code I showed in the previous lecture. Okay, I want to keep it like this here. Success with assignment 2. If you have not seen these Zauberbook examples, please check them out before the lab section tomorrow or Wednesday. Thanks.